Have you ever looked at the modern Middle East and just wondered? Wondered how a historically massive, powerful region ended up so incredibly fragmented today? Well, you're definitely not alone. We're going to dive right into this explainer, breaking down Abu Yarab al-Marzuki's really controversial yet highly academic text. He's looking at the deep roots of Arab and Muslim geopolitical weakness. And honestly, he kind of takes a sledgehammer to some widely accepted historical narratives, using philosophical frameworks to argue that the stories a society tells itself about its past literally dictate its power, or lack thereof, in the present.
So here's the central, super provocative question the author throws at us. Why does he claim that a quote-unquote distorted Islamic history is the actual root cause of the region's modern subjugation? It's a massive premise, right? The text essentially argues that the political impotence we're seeing today isn't just about modern economics or recent conflicts. No, it's a symptom of something way deeper, a profound historical misunderstanding. Al-Marzuki claims that modern political movements have blindly adopted a totally falsified version of early Islamic history. And by basing their modern strategies on a romanticized, inaccurate past, they inadvertently strip themselves of actual political power, leaving the whole region incredibly vulnerable to foreign exploitation. Here's our roadmap for how we'll unpack all of this. First, the modern geopolitical rift. Second, reevaluating the Great Sedition. Third, we'll look at Ibn Khaldun's political theory. Fourth, the roots of historical distortion. Fifth, the minor sedition and modern reality. And finally, combining legitimacy and power. All right, starting off with Section 1, Modern Geopolitical Rift, and this idea of subjugation in the modern era.
According to the author, to fix the problem, we first have to really understand it, and the text makes a pretty bold assertion here. The Arab world has essentially lost its autonomy. Al-Marzuki argues that these states aren't independent actors shaping their own destinies anymore. Instead, they've been reduced to basically subordinates, just guarding their own lands, functioning as little more than protectorates for foreign empires. Why? Well, because regional elites base their legitimacy on a distorted historical model, one that totally separates moral righteousness from actual material power.
Which brings us right to Section 2. Let's look at reevaluating the Great Sedition and uncover this historical fracture.
So, going way back, the Great Sedition was basically the first massive civil war in Islamic history, and the text points out that later scholars tried to make sense of this massive trauma in two totally different ways. You've got Ibn Hanbal's emotional solution on one side, which was all about preserving unity even if it meant looking past certain historical facts just to heal the community and keep people together. But then on the flip side, you have Ibn Khaldun's philosophical solution. This was pure, cold realism. He argued that we absolutely must separate pure ethical ideals from the messy, on-the-ground reality of political legitimacy.
Now, maintaining strict neutrality here, the text dives into a highly debated area by totally deconstructing the revered historical narrative around Ali ibn Abi Talib. Al-Marzuki points out a few specific things. First, that he was never actually appointed as a commander of major conquest by the Prophet. Second, he wasn't included in that innermost policy circle under the first three caliphs. And lastly, the text argues that his eventual caliphate relied on what it describes as a coup against the legitimate system. Building a modern political identity on an inflated, victimized version of this narrative, the author argues that is a literal recipe for disaster.
Moving right along to Section 3, Ibn Khaldun's political theory, focusing on this constant battle of ethics versus politics.
What is absolutely fascinating about Ibn Khaldun's framework is how he totally separates pure morality from gritty political reality. He coined this rule of non-sinning in politics. Basically, it distinguishes between an ethical obligation, which historically al-Hussein held, and actual political legitimacy based on majority consensus, which Muawiyah held. So you might have the moral high ground, absolutely, but Ibn Khaldun argues that real, legitimate power actually requires majority consensus and the ability to enforce stability. Claiming moral superiority without actual power in the consensus of the people, the author notes that's just a political dead end. Okay, so how did this narrative get so twisted in the first place? Let's get into Section 4, Roots of Historical Distortion, specifically looking at the succession of power.
Al-Marzuki uses this specific timeline to argue something huge, that the Prophet intentionally left succession up to the public interest, rather than setting up some divine appointment. Just think about it. During the Prophet's era, it was left open. Then Abu Bakr actually appointed his successor directly, and after that, Umar appointed a committee of 6 to decide.
The text argues that if leadership was supposed to be a strict, divinely mandated bloodline, this succession would have been totally uniform. But since it wasn't, it proves early Islamic leadership was always meant to be a matter of public administration and consensus, not a sacred, unchangeable religious pillar.
To back this up, the author anchors his argument with this really specific quote. When Ali's uncle, Abbas, wanted to go ask the Prophet who would rule after him, Ali stopped him and said, "If he denies us it, we shall not hope for it for the rest of time." For al-Marzuki, this is definitive proof. He's saying Ali himself absolutely knew there was no secret will or divine appointment. The distortion, therefore, was inventing a narrative of stolen divine right way after the fact, just to retroactively justify political rebellion.
According to the text, this whole narrative got completely weaponized later on during the Abbasid era. It argues that esoteric factions, movements relying on secret knowledge, basically hijacked the true history, using the myth of Ali's divine right as a cover to hollow out the state. The Arab role became purely symbolic. It actually took demographic shifts, specifically groups like the Turks, Kurds, and Berbers stepping up to defeat external threats to finally restore a true balance based on consensus and actual strength. It's a stark example of how historical myths can literally disarm an entire civilization.
And that brings us right to Section 5, the minor sedition and modern reality, where we see history echoing today.
So how exactly does this play out in the modern world? Well, al-Marzuki argues that both Western and Eastern powers actively exploit this fractured history to their advantage, echoing the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement that carved up the borders during World War I. You've got Western imperialism dividing the physical geography, meanwhile Eastern imperialism is shattering the shared history by exploiting those ancient, distorted narratives we just talked about. And the regional impact? Total exploitation of weakness. They both win by creating these weak protectorates managed by local elites who lack any true grassroots legitimacy.
Finally, let's look at the proposed solution in Section 6, combining legitimacy and power, and the path forward.
The author heavily emphasizes this crucial concept of shwaka, which translates to force and consensus. It's the critical combination of material force and popular agreement. The text argues this is absolutely essential for true political legitimacy and autonomy. You can't just be morally right. If you claim moral legitimacy, but you don't have material force and the backing of the people, if you don't have shwaka, you're completely defenseless. You'll just end up relying on foreign powers to survive, becoming a pawn in someone else's game. True autonomy requires the hard work of building real capability.
So to fix this massive vulnerability, al-Marzuki advocates for return to what he calls the Mohammedan strategy. This means reuniting moral legitimacy with real power and consensus. How? Through critical, philosophical thinking to finally reclaim the region's geopolitical autonomy. It means ditching romanticized emotional victimhood and embracing a harsh philosophical awakening. Basically, stop fighting 7th century battles based on myths and start focusing on merging cultural legitimacy with undeniable modern material strength.
Which leaves us with this final massive question. If the region's modern geopolitical weakness is truly rooted in centuries of distorted history, what is it actually going to take for the Arab and Muslim world to finally reclaim its narrative and its autonomy? It's a lot to ponder, right? Al-Marzuki's text really challenges us to see that history isn't just stuff that happened in the past. It's the literal operating system running modern political realities. Until the bugs in that system, those historical distortions, are critically examined and resolved, true autonomy might just remain out of reach. It's an intense, complex argument for sure, but absolutely crucial for understanding the deep currents driving the Middle East today.